And good afternoon. Welcome back to the Space Innovation Summit. I'm Major General retired Clint Crosier, and after 33 years on active duty with the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Space Force, I have the privilege of leading the global space business at Amazon Web Services now. And so I'm very happy to be joined by a couple of my esteemed colleagues, and we're going to have a panel on discussing future investment opportunities in space. And what does it mean as we invest in this new space economy? I'm going to invite each of my colleagues to spend just a minute or two talking about your companies and your roles and maybe some initial thoughts about the future space economy investment. And then I'll circle back and we'll do sort of some interactive Q&A. But let me start with my friend here, Nicole Robinson. Nicole is Chief Growth Officer at Comtech, and we appreciate Comtech as a key sponsor of this forum today, by the way. So Nicole, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're really excited to be here. It's a dynamic topic of investing in the space economy. At Comtech, we have, for the better part of 55 years now, been a leading technology provider in ground systems infrastructure, terrestrial and wireless networks, and really excited to see a lot of the convergence happening in the community today. The convergence between satellite communications and geospatial, the convergence between terrestrial and wireless and Satcom networks. Really enthusiastic about being the tip of the spear from an infrastructure perspective and helping all of those capabilities come together and what it means for our end users. And of course, as is the subject today, the investment community as well. So looking forward to jumping in.
You really are, excuse me, at a center point, right? You talk about convergence, infrastructure, ground service provider. That is a unique experience that we'll circle back and talk about, but thank you. Next up, I'd like to introduce Dave Fields. Dave is President and CEO of SES Space and Defense. Dave.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity. So the satellite industry has always been very capital intensive, right? This is an industry that's always had a lot of investment, and both public and private investment has been absolutely critical for our success. SES has invested billions over the years in becoming the largest GEO and MEO satellite operator in the world. We have over 70 satellites. However, the world is changing. Our world is changing. This industry is changing significantly. There's a whole new level of investment that's going on that can't be ignored, and it's true disruption to our industry. So it's an exciting time to be a part of the industry. 10 years ago, SES saw the world changing as well with the need to move to lower Earth orbits, lower latency, higher throughput. We've invested in what was then the O3B constellation, and all of that work is now being used to advance the next technology, the next constellation, our Gen 2 constellation in O3B mPOWER, which is really exciting for us to get launched. But the investments go way beyond the launch vehicles and the satellites. It's really, how do we drive value for our customers, for our partners, for investors, and through innovation and technology and also infrastructure. But really, the other part of the investment right now is really in consolidation of the industry.
We're seeing that, man.
Yeah, in both horizontal and vertical integration. So we're very very cognizant of that, because in order to gain the scale that you need to compete in this market, you have to, consolidation will continue to happen in the market. So that actually happened in 2022 when SES bought the DRS Global Enterprise Solutions business, which allow us to be more vertically integrated in the government market. But at the end of the day, it's about why. Why do you need to invest? Why are we doing this? And for us, really, we as SES, we're making these investments because we say we like to do the extraordinary things in space to provide amazing capabilities on Earth. We've done that for 40 years. We're going to continue to do that for another 40. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome. And you tee up some interesting things already, too, just as we jump in. You talked about the need for embracing change. And I'll tell you, from my perspective, both somebody who's been on the government side of space, both military and commercial space for a long time, and now on the commercial space side, boy, embracing change is not always easy, but we are living in such an innovative time of technology change and revolution. Those of us that don't embrace change and drive it forward will be carried along in the wave, I think. And so that's really important. And I'll circle back. I'll ask you a couple of things about that too. And then last, but certainly not least, I have my friend André Pienaar. André is president and CEO of C5 Capital. And we know some companies and work with some companies mutually in your role there. But André, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Opening comments, please.
General, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this great and seasoned panel. As a private investor in the space sector, C5 is very excited about the convergence between private investment and space innovation, which is the theme of this American Future Series Summit. And in the space sector, we really have an opportunity to help create the future. And space innovation is driving so much of the future. And as a private investor, we are invested across all the segments of the space economy, starting with the satellite community, where the space community started almost 70 years ago now, in companies like Satcom, which provides a resilient alternative to PNT and the GPS system, all the way through to new space companies like Axiom Space, which is building the successor to the International Space Station. So we're very excited to be part of this conversation this morning.
Yeah, thank you, André. And that really is a helpful perspective, because one of the things we're going to talk about is the change that we've seen in the industry. So I'm not calling anybody out, but I looked at everybody's bios and resumes, and we've got about 159 collective years in the space industry, in the commercial industry amongst us. So we've all got some time in the business. And I'll tell you, the thing that's really amazing to me, looking back over the last 10 or 15, 20 years, is the amount of change, not only innovation. I mean, I tell people we're living in the most exciting time to be part of the space industry in my whole lifetime, but behind just the original Apollo missions. But when we think about how investment has changed and where technology development has changed, what's the biggest thing that you've seen? I'll throw it to each of you. What's the biggest trend you've seen just over the last 10 years or so in terms of how we build the space enterprise, military or commercial, how it's invested in, just broadly? What's the biggest change you've seen in the last 10, 15 years?
Want me to start?
Please.
I'd say over the past 10 years, there's been a big shift from kind of raw capability in space to getting to the end user with a more processed or a managed service. So for satellite communications, it's away from just raw megahertz sales, lighting up a transponder and sending out a lease agreement, to now a megabit service, an end-to-end managed service, delivering that connectivity to the end user to accomplish their goal. So thinking in terms of the end user is a big shift. For geospatial, very similar. Gone are the days where we focus just on the pixels, just on the collection of the data from space. And now it's into processing that data, producing analytics, allowing for the insight to be derived so that key decisions can be made. So that's a big shift. It's more of a focus on the end user now and enabling capability, less on what's actually in space. Yeah,
mission outcomes, right? That's the big change I've seen sort of along those lines too. I tell people sometimes, I spent my whole career flying satellites and launching rockets. And as much as I love doing that, at the end of the day, as much as it pains me to say, it's not about the satellites and the rockets. It's about the data that comes down from those satellites and rockets. And more importantly, how we can turn it into insights, whether DoD, intelligence, security insights, or insights. We're using space data today for climate management and wildlife protection and agriculture support, and all those kind of things. It's been a really powerful change, but it's all about providing solutions rather than just endpoint or initial point capabilities, which I think is really key. André, on the investment side, 15 years ago, I would say there weren't really a lot of investment opportunities in commercial space, or even in space that supports military and national defense. How have you seen that change in the last 10 years or so?
Yes, space has been the domain of governments, and then with the listing of companies like Iridium, with whom we partnered in Satcom, it's become the domain of capital markets, and have now moved on and opened up to the private sector and to private capital, which is a big change. And one of the enablers for private capital to come into the space sector has been the public-private partnership that NASA and NASA's leadership has set out to build. And I think Bill Nelson, the administrator of NASA, speaks very clearly about this, about the fact that NASA is building a partnership with the private sector, both in the US, but also with US allies. And I think that's the second part to the opening up of the space sector for investment, is the fact that the US is leading through NASA the democratization of space and really opening up access to space to medium-sized and small nations, developing countries who previously have not had access to space. And a good example of that is Axiom Space, which has had a series of missions to the International Space Station with astronauts from countries that would otherwise not have had access to that club.
Yeah.
And I think we're just at the beginning of the democratization of space, and the remarks that have been made about focusing on the end user, I think is very much part of that process.
Yeah, agreed. The commercialization, NASA, I think we would all agree, has really led the way, because my whole career, space was the domain of large, well-funded governments, right, as you said. And NASA really changed that paradigm when it started letting commercial contracts like the CLPS contract, Commercial Lunar Payload Services, and commercializing parts of and ultimately the International Space Station. Powerful change. So I think NASA deserves a lot of credit for that. And to your point, what I've seen is it's opened up an entire new part of the economy, right? Commercial space economy. And even on the defense side, General Raymond, who I know we're going to see and honor a little bit later this evening, has talked about buying what he can in terms of commercial space capability and only building that which they need for specific DoD purposes. And that's a fundamental change. Dave, how have you seen the fundamental change in either how we acquire or invest to provide space capabilities over the last 10, 15, 20 years? What's the biggest observation on your side?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's the approach is different now for governments, U.S. government in particular, but I'll say governments across the world, because this is not a unique problem to the U.S. Things like the procurement cycles, but mainly the approach. You put out an architecture and you say, this is what I want to achieve. These are the things I want to do. Now, what are my options to make that happen? And I think it's important that now they're looking at commercial as an opportunity. From an SES point of view, what we look at is we have a platform to operate a number of things, whether it's space relay for NASA, which we have a contract to do that, but it could be hosted payloads, it could be sensors as a service, or it could be a constellation within a constellation, right? So you have a sovereign capability that can be used for your needs, and it meets your needs. It's not just providing an unsecured kind of open system out there where you build on. I mean, this is purpose-built platforms for governments. So we're excited about that. We're excited about them continuing, the U.S. government and others continuing to look at commercial as a viable opportunity, an option for building their platforms in the future, rather than just having a true government-owned, operated sovereign capability. We can get a similar sovereign capability through commercial. Yeah,
and clearly that's been the big realization of the government. Again, I grew up in that environment where the government would try to hold on to everything, under the very important reason of classification and security. But two things have happened. One is it's become so expensive to continue to build out the kind of capabilities that we need, and the government has realized the innovation and the capability is there in the commercial market. The other piece is we've been able to satisfy government customers that we can meet security requirements, right? Across all of our companies, we're meeting security requirements. And I will tell you, even, back 10 years ago when AWS, Amazon Web Services, opened up our first top secret commercial cloud offering, that was a game changer for the rest of the industry. But we have to continue to earn trust there too, demonstrating that we can meet those requirements of national security. But that's been a powerful partnership, I think.
From a cost point of view, which you just mentioned, it's really important that we look at all the cost elements. It's not just the U.S. government who now can use commercial for maybe to reduce their price rather than buying and managing their own.
Right.
From an operator point of view, it's very important that we look for other alternative ways to fund these satellites moving forward and offer them as a platform for other types of services. So, and then thirdly, you've got countries who in the past could never have afforded their own capabilities.
Yeah.
And now it becomes within the realm of reality to own a piece of a constellation rather than having to build, launch, and operate your own.
I love this subject too, because it's, it kind of started with the government sort of encouraging industry to step up. There was a bit of about 10 to 15 years ago, debunking the myth of what military Satcom systems can and should do versus what commercial Satcom systems can and should do.
Yeah.
So the industry really leaned forward. I mean, with SES, the deployment of GovSat-1, which is a military frequency satellite, private-public partnership with Luxembourg and SES, And that also helped to push the way companies like my company, Comtech, developing WGS certified modems and antenna technology that can operate on GovSat, that can operate on WGS. So it really creates this spirit of resiliency, of redundancy, of having assured access because you can work across military architectures and commercial architectures. It's a great moment.
And I think there's a great part of resiliency that comes with that too, especially in the Satcom market, right? Again, not isolating to military and government, national security. We'll circle back to more commercial in a minute. But even on that piece, part of the growth, part of the rise has been the ability to leverage those additional capabilities. And that's led through allies and partners too, by the way, because we see great growth opportunities supporting allies and partners for the U.S. that want to be part of that as well.
The other issue is with, as Nicole was saying, you have to be able to leverage all of the capabilities. The government, there will always be a need for sovereign government-owned and operated capabilities.
Sure.
But that resource might not be available. You have to also be able to use commercial. So it's really important that we get to some standards, we get to some capabilities that can transition from one to the other. Mm-hmm. And I think commercial like GovSat one's a great example of a government capability, a true government capability, resilient capability, but it's a public and private partnership that made that happen. So it's really important that the applications are going to drive the demand for bandwidth moving forward. It's never going to go backwards, right? We're always going to, the applications will always drive that up. So it's really important that we're always looking at what the next capability is that we can add to the core. It's not about getting rid of any of the core capabilities. No. It's about adding and augmenting and expanding the capabilities.
Yeah, as people ask me, what do I think the future of space looks like? I mean, it's hard to have a crystal ball, but one of the things I tell them is whether it's geospatial data, whether it's satellite communications capabilities, we will never use space less than we do today, right? That's one thing I can guarantee, right? We're not going back. We will never use space, geospatial, space-based capability less as a world than we do today. So that's a certainty. So some really good observations sort of in what's changed over the last 20 years. And I think all for the good, right? The health of the commercial economy, the global economy, to the benefit of the military and national security who have their costs now less and have increased capabilities. And by the way, I should point out that we're also seeing some of the greatest innovation come out of the commercial sector today. There was a time where innovation was, at least in the space industry, was also a purview of the largest and best funded governments. Now, some of the smallest startups are bringing forward the most innovative capability. And Andre, I know you pay attention to that each and every day. How do you think about when you're focusing on a company to invest in, or when you're looking for opportunities for the future? How do you think about innovation and technology together as you make a decision about what to fund and what not to fund?
So we look at 10 segments across the space economy, each of which we track and which we follow. Of course, the most spectacular segment is the launch section, with SpaceX being the leader, and the pioneering work that SpaceX and Elon Musk have done around reusable rockets and reducing the cost of payloads have been transformative for the space.
Some 100x, by the way. I mean, I've seen studies, depending on the data you look at, 100 times reduction in the cost to launch in the last 30 years, by the way.
And it's really been one of the main innovations that are opening up the space sector and opening up new possibilities in the space sector. But it's also been transformative for investing in space, given the success of SpaceX as a privately owned company that has a valuation in the range of $150 billion at the moment. It's also one of the developments that for the first time made money for entrepreneurs and founders in the space sector because of the size of the well-regulated secondary market in SpaceX, where folks who were part of the company are allowed by the management and the leadership to sell some of the shares and get a return on the time and the know-how they've invested in the business. So all in all, that's been transformative. But although the launch sector is very exciting and it's always spectacular to look at a launch and a re-landing of a reusable rocket, there are many other segments in the space sector that's really exciting. We've talked about geospatial and the role that the satellite industry continues to play in the developing of the geospatial sector. But in addition to that, there are satellite manufacturing. There are all sizes of satellites that are being manufactured.
Yeah.
There's, of course, the whole question of energy in space and in-orbit refueling. There's the whole question of managing space debris. At a terrestrial level, there's the expansion and investment of ground infrastructure, networks and spaceports, ground stations. And then, of course, the most valuable and the most exciting and the fastest growing part of the space sector remains to be data and value-added analytics. And now we have so many exciting new initiatives around the application of artificial intelligence in space.
Yeah. Wow. You gave us a lot to think about there, and some really interesting observations. When we think about new space, and we think about opportunities to invest in new space, when you start thinking about the new LEO economy that's going to emerge, right? And Axiom is going to replace the International Space Station. Blue Origin is building a commercial space station. There are other organizations that are out there in that business, and we're seeing the concepts of an entire LEO economy are being developed right now. Asteroid mining, on-orbit satellite servicing, Dave, that's something that we never got to do, right, in our career. Once you launched a satellite, you were done, whatever happened to it. But the idea that you could go up and do repairs or refueling, that's just extraordinary. And then when you start to think about in-space manufacturing, maybe we don't need to launch everything from the Earth. Maybe we start to produce some things in orbit. As we think about all of that, what are your overall thoughts about where there are big opportunities for investment in the commercial space or military space market going forward? Against all that backdrop, where do you think are the biggest growth opportunities? All of you.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting, you talked about data processing and analytics and AI, ML, and kind of that space. I actually think that's a really interesting moment for investment, and just to kind of double click on it a little bit, because when we talked about the convergence of different sectors within space and satellite, like Satcom and geospatial, the way that you're relating that information between the two communities
more
is particularly
integrated than ever before.
Yeah. And Dave talked about data relay that SES is doing for NASA now. And this is, a concept of how do you leverage a geospatial asset at LEO, and instead of bringing that data back to the ground, sending it over a MEO or a LEO constellation for access to those, ground stations that are persistently staring. And where do you do that processing and analytics and deliver that insight to the edge for a customer? So I think there's a really exciting moment there when you think about optical connection between those constellations. You think of RF connection, the different ways of accelerating the transport of that data, the delivery of that data to the ground for processing and for analytics. And next generation, how do you do that processing and analytics from space? If it's about hosting algorithms and running those analytics before it comes back down to the ground, what does that do for speed? What does that do for decision makers to make oftentimes what's life-saving decisions?
Yeah, that's a really interesting piece of the future that so many space organizations or companies are thinking about. And the on-orbit space capability, I'd remiss if I didn't say, at AWS, we partnered with Axiom Space, and we launched an edge computing device into orbit on AX-1 and then put it on the International Space Station. And we've been running experiments about what does on-orbit compute look like? Yeah. What does it allow you to do? And, it's incredible. Even thinking about to run a genomic sequencing experiment could take, an hour to run the experiment, and given the limited bandwidth and pipes, up to 12 to 18 hours to download the data. So you're really getting one experiment a day, not limited by the ability to do experiment in space, which is the expensive part. It's limited by the ability to bring data down. So when you think about what does on-orbit compute capability look like and what does it do for you, boy, it opens all sorts of interesting things for the future. And so it was exciting to be able to do that. Dave.
Yeah, I was gonna add on to what Nicole said, and that is, in terms of the future of Satcom and whether it's commercial or military, I don't think it really matters. It's really a convergence of all IT capabilities together. Your company, focuses on cloud computing, and yet you're, heavily into space. It's that convergence where I see the real value. How do we talk about multi-orbit, multi-frequency kind of capabilities. How do you tie all of that together and make it seamless for an individual operator, user out there in the field to use this capability? That's to me is the holy grail of what we we need to get to is how do we
Yeah.
tie it all together?
Yeah.
Because all the capabilities are out there, but it's the tying it all together, the software capability. Even as SES, we're investing heavily in software to orchestrate, GEO and MEO capabilities in particular, but it could go beyond that to LEO and terrestrial capabilities. So I think that orchestration is really going to be fundamental moving forward.
Yeah, the orchestration piece is really interesting. I mean, I think Nirvana for a long time, those of us that have been in the space industry for a while, we built the space industry in a very stovepipe way. One satellite system could talk to one ground station and didn't really share data anywhere else outside that sort of closed sphere. And we did it for a number of reasons. But then as the space industry started to grow, we kind of looked at our cell phones, and Nirvana was, hey, when I travel internationally, when I get off the airplane, my cell phone just works. I don't know what tower I'm connected or anything else, but I know it always works. And so SES really led the way in terms of GEO, MEO integration, right? So congratulations for that. And I love the vision you've described, that's just a starting point. Where do you see us going? What do we need to be doing in the future, both in terms of concepts of operation and the investment to go with it? What's your thought there is how we integrate all that?
Yeah, I'll temper the enthusiasm just a little bit, and because everyone wants to compare the Satcom industry to the cell phone industry, the reality is, the cell phone industry, they build a billion handsets a year, right?
Yeah.
We're orders of magnitude away from that.
That part's
right?
certainly different.
So the value, the costs are different and all of that. So, but that is the holy grail. That's Nirvana, to get to a point where I'm an operator, for example, and I drop my terminal on the ground and hit go, and I don't even know which satellite it goes to. I don't know which orbit it goes to. It doesn't matter.
That's
All I
what
know
of our users
is when I turn it on, does it work for me?
Yeah.
And that's what, where we're getting to a point where software can help us manage that, right? Whether they should not know what orbit they're in. It should not matter. All I know is now I have connectivity back to my cloud, to whatever it is I need. That's the most important thing. I think we're certainly from a government point of view, from a private sector point of view, that's where we're all moving towards. We're all investing in that. We're all trying to make that happen. And I don't think we're too far off. Now, the cell phone thing is still that's a few steps out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're getting close.
Yeah. So what do you think for each of you? So so again, I go back to my military days, and so joint all domain command and control, all domain awareness and capability, integrated capability, every sensor connected to every shooter. And then when you think about the commercial market, right? People just want coverage wherever they are. They don't want to have to know or configure how they got there. So when you think about that, what are the things that we need to be doing from a policy, but primarily investment perspective? What do we need to be doing to enable in that? Are there things that we need to be able to doing from within the industry? Are there things that we need more capital investment to do? I'll just put that out there.
I'll just throw one thing out to get the conversation started, and that is really it going back to your comment about getting off the plane. In order for that to happen, there has to be partnerships among the operators, right?
Okay.
And that's key for what we're doing right now. Even within our own contracts that we have today, one of the things that I like to think that SES does as well as anyone in the industry is bring the industry together, bring the capabilities, all the capabilities together, integrate them together into a seamless capability for our customers. Until you do that, it cannot, you can't just go anywhere and do anything. So
it's integrated at the design level and at the planning level.
Exactly. And so right now, I think it's being done by the individual, the commercial companies that are doing this. I think that's the nirvana for the U.S. government as well. And obviously they're making investments in software and things like that to do that. It's going to require things like AI and ML to get us there, right? To optimize that capability. So there's a lot of investment opportunities there moving forward.
Oh, I think you're pulling on so many great threads here. I mean, this concept of orchestration and satellite network optimization, that's true for every constellation, whether it's Satcom, so you're looking at ways of really optimizing the number of customers per carrier, or if it's for geospatial, you're looking for a way of optimizing a network of multiple modalities so that you're assuring collection for a customer when they need visibility of what's changing in a particular locale. So I think there's along the lines of orchestration and satellite network optimization, there's actually things that we can learn from in the industry to apply. It doesn't all have to be creating new. It's a new application. So, for example, at Comtech, we have our terrestrial and wireless business that's been doing network optimization for decades.
Yeah.
So how do we take that learning and apply it now to Satcom networks, to geospatial networks? I think it's a really interesting moment, and conversations like these help industry to think a little bit more about how can we leverage the experience we have to apply it to new markets.
Yeah, and that is so powerful as you think about the infrastructure, because again, been in the space business a long time, and there was a common frustration for a long time that when we built a new system, we focused on the satellite piece, the shiny piece in space, and the ground system was often lacking or didn't have the integration capabilities. As you talked, Dave, about integrating from the beginning, right? We've got to think about the whole end to end, from the ground segment to the on-orbit segment and to the delivery piece in between. But that comes with building it in the planning and ConOps, which is so important, I think. Nicole, I'd like to ask you another question, just changing venues just a little bit. You were in the Satcom industry 14 or so years, I think, with SES, great company. And then you moved in the last couple of years, you've been focused on geospatial capability and now infrastructure. Is there a common theme that you see for future investment or future growth across those? I mean, how would you recommend we think about that, or Andre think about it as he's looking for future investment opportunities?
Yeah, I think there's really two categories of themes that I've seen fairly common across both of those industries, Satcom and geospatial. The first is really moving away from, if you think of geospatial, one modality to multiple modalities for geolocation accuracy, for enhanced situational awareness. So being able to layer AIS with RF mapping, with SAR, synthetic aperture radar, and optical, really improves that quality and assurance of understanding of what's changing in the world around you. So from single modality to multimodality. Relatedly, for Satcom, away from one orbit, one frequency, to multi-orbit, multi-frequency, as Dave was mentioning before. In both communities, the end users don't care the source,
right?
It's kind of a self-licking ice cream cone to think about one modality and talk about that one satellite and that one tech. Instead, again, coming back to the end user, assuring they have collection where and when it's needed most, assuring they have connectivity where and when it's needed most. That means multi-orbit, multi-frequency, multi-modality. So I think that's one common trend. The other common trend from Satcom to geospatial is, again, away from kind of having raw megahertz, raw pixels, to now processed and managed connectivity and insight. I think that's particularly important. Gone are the days where people are looking to buy the wheat. They want the bread. They don't want the raw megahertz. They want the end-to-end network connectivity. They don't want the raw pixels. They want that insight. I think there's two different parts of the space and satellite sector, but very common themes being expressed between both.
And by the way, that mission delivery, the wheat versus the bread that you and Dave both spoke about, a lot of that comes with the powerful improvements in software and integration. And you mentioned software earlier. More and more I see that we're going from a hardware industry that had a little bit of software, 30 years ago, to where now we're building software-defined networks, software-defined radios, software-defined satellites, software-defined integration systems. Are you seeing that that's, both the major investment, maybe corporately as well as across the industry?
Yes, the digital transformation of the space sector is another enabler for private capital. Historically, both private equity and venture capital have been very wary of very hardware, capital-heavy infrastructure investments. But the fact that so much digital transformation is happening in the space sector and so much software innovations taking place have really opened up the sector to private investment. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that in 2021, private sector investment in the space sector was 2x the size of NASA's budget. So $47 billion of private capital invested versus NASA's budget of $24 billion. That's tapered off a little bit last year, where private capital sort of matched the size of NASA's budget. And this year private capital's contribution will probably be less. But I think the private sector and private capital is here to stay in this space sector. And this public-private partnership that NASA has established is going to be enduring.
Yeah, that is a powerful observation, Dave.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. I think, satellite's always been used for command and control type applications, but control is going to take on a new meaning when you can actually control the bandwidth that you're using for command and control applications. So being able to put a beam exactly where you need it, when you need it, that's going to be critical for us moving forward. And I think when you do that, you have to, it's all software driven. It has to be software driven. Yeah. So it goes back to what I was saying before, and that's all of these industries are converging. It's a very blurry line now between software, IT, Satcom. You really shouldn't, as a user, as a consumer, you really shouldn't know about any of that. It should all be kind of abstracted out. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is making this what we do is really, really hard, right? Yeah. And we need to make it really, really easy for the user. And that's the challenge.
Yeah. Piggybacking on that, one of the things I'm really excited to see, even in my own experience and with my own company, in years past, you would advertise for a satellite software engineer. Right. And the skill set from somebody that knows how to do software programming for satellites was fundamentally different than anybody else that programmed anything else in any other industry. That part is changing as well, so that the standards and interfaces become more ubiquitous. And that's going to only allow the commercial industry to grow and the government industry to grow and create capital investment opportunity as well. That's really powerful and exciting, I think. So we've just got a minute or so to wrap up. So let me just, I love the conversation about no longer about providing, bandwidth. It's now about providing integrated solutions. We're moving more to software-defined capabilities. We need more integration from GEO, LEO, MEO to multimodality and multi-int and multi-sensors and all those sorts of things. That's going to take a cooperation between companies, as you said, and or some sort of influence either by the investors or the government. Where do you think that is going? Do we have the right mechanisms within the government or the private investment world to sort of encourage those integrations? Either of you?
I'll tell you my thought on it very quickly because I know we're out of time, but it's really about creating an ecosystem, right? And at SES, what we're looking at is how do we don't need to do everything, but we need to be able to do everything, right? And so it's bringing in partners, it's bringing in, companies that can help us achieve the results that we need for our customers. I think that's critical. I'll tell you, when I started in this industry many years ago, I remember that we owned our own satellite, and I remember people saying, "Well, as soon as fiber is deployed everywhere, satellite will not be needed." Today, it's the combination of terrestrial and satellite and software, and IT and cyber that makes it powerful. And I think this is a crazy exciting time to be in the satellite industry.
That's the key in my mind. It's a crazy exciting time, and we've got some of the greatest opportunities for the future moving forward. I want to hit one theme before we wrap up. We've got a minute or two left. Sustainability. Andre, you and I were having an interesting discussion in the green room about what sustainability means for space. We think about sustainability as sustaining our waters or our plant life here on Earth. What does sustainability look like when you think about space, and why should that be important to all of us?
Of course, our planet is part of a very exciting solar system, and everything that's going on our planet is integrated into our solar system, and the moon is the best example of that. But in the space economy, geospatial, for example, has such an important contribution to make to help combat climate change with everything from the protection of our rainforests to sustainable agriculture to monitoring the impact of climate change. And then as far as clean energy is concerned, the space station, of course, pioneered the use of solar energy in space because it's entirely based on solar energy. And now we are moving forward with the strong support of the US Congress to developing solar energy infrastructure in space. And then, of course, there's the role of advanced nuclear. X-Energy, one of our portfolio companies, has a partnership with Axiom Space to build a small modular nuclear reactor into the next International Space Station, but also to bring nuclear energy and small modular nuclear reactor innovation to the surface of the moon with the Artemis moon base. And I think all of these are really exciting developments to help combat climate change.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, we're working with companies that are, currently building concepts for space debris mitigation and some of those kind of things. And that is really interesting opportunities. Okay, so we're out of time here. Let me just thank my panelists. Great conversation. We could talk all day about future capability, future investment. We won't do that. We've got a break coming up. But let me just thank Nicole, Dave, and Andre for being with us today. Interesting conversation and subject. And I hope you all have enjoyed the Space Innovation Summit today, and you'll come back after the break. Thank you.